All right. So today, like I was teeing up a second ago, is essentially about creative identity, which I think is an interesting conversation. So I actually just got off the phone with somebody who has been an editor her whole life, a writer, and she's a little bit like me in that she was in copy back in the day. So like back when it used to be physical copy and you would like lay out a physical newsletter on a table, which I know most of you can't relate to. But the thought of a creative identity and ourselves as creative professionals, I think is an interesting one because I think all of us, even on this call, all of us interpret that very differently and kind of own that in different ways. And we've talked about this before where like, I don't think I would even really describe myself as, I would definitely not describe myself as an artistic person, like at all. Like I'm just not artsy. But I am creative in the sense that I like to make something from nothing. Like I love the process of starting with a blank page and creating something. So I think just to level set at the beginning of this conversation, let's avoid the conflation of artisticness and creativity because those aren't necessarily the same. Well, they aren't the same at all. And so what we're talking about when we talk about creative identity is not necessarily that we have this identification of being artists, but that we are people who like to make something out of nothing or like to make something new out of something different, right? Something that exists. So let's talk a little bit about like start at the origin. Where do we think creativity actually comes from? We talk about this often because it's complicated, right? Is it purely cognitive? Is there some kind of like metaphysical component to it? Like we just happen upon epiphanies? Is that itself cognitive and we're just defining it differently? So where do you think, and we can make this personal, we don't have to think of like setting universal rules. Where do you think creativity comes from for yourself?
For me.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I knew we were gonna jump on each other here, Mark. I knew
You're good.
it. Yeah, for me, I think creativity is an itch for me. It's not necessarily a skill because I don't know that I'm skilled in creativity, but I think when I look at something that doesn't exist, I get this itch where I have to alter and manipulate and change and create, and that's what it is for me. It's like a need to change something. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but that's almost what I can pin it down to every time.
I don't know. I interpret the question that that you posed, Joy, more as where like I guess on a personal level, right? I think my creativity comes from my youth more than anything. I was lucky enough to have parents that didn't stifle my creativity whenever I was young. So I started creative writing in elementary school. I started doing all of these different things as an outlet for all of my energy, I guess you would say. But I think that was the roots of where it came from. Today, I think it's more lending a voice to something, especially in when it comes to writing, right? If we're looking at that specifically, I think it's how can I interpret a specific topic, a specific problem, and incorporate my voice, my opinion, my experience into that. And I think that that's probably where I guess scratch the itch that Caitlin's talking about. I think that anytime I see that, if anytime I'm given a prompt, if I think if I'm going to write something on my own, you know, what do I want to address and how do I want to incorporate those pieces into it, of myself into it.
Yeah, I think I'd kind of build on what Mark says, and I think everyone is inherently creative a little bit. Obviously, some people are more creative than others, but you're creative every day. When you decide, what kind of seasoning you want to put in your dinner, if you decide like what color you want to paint your walls, like all of that is creativity. So there's a lot of different levels to creativity. I think for me, it's like cumulative, right? The more creative I am, the more kind of creative I feel, and the more experience I have of being creative, then the more naturally it comes to me. But I think it's, for me at least, it's definitely a skill. It's something that I can tap into if I sit down in front of the blank page and have to write something. But it's not an itch the same that has to be scratched the same way as it is for Kaitlin. I think for me it's like just like any other cognitive skill that I can kind of tap into and make use of when the time calls for it.
Yeah, I agree with Ross that I think that we're all born with creativity. in us. And probably that looks different for different people, but then in, you know, maybe your house, things are like different skills when you're growing up are maybe seen as more valuable or something. So you kind of focus on those. Or, you know, some people maybe in their house, like creativity is super important. And so that's nurtured more. And so you are able to carry those skills into adulthood a little bit more. But yeah, I think we all have it in us. And I think it's a little bit of like a nature versus nurture thing, whether you're able to access those skills as an adult.
It's interesting. Ross mentioned flipping it on, right? And I guess I go the opposite direction. And especially whenever I look to decompress, right? At the end of the day, anything like that, I'm looking for ways to flip off my creativity. I look for very, analytical tasks, things that I can do that have very set regimented things. And that's the way that I relax at the end of the day, because because I'm constantly in this creative mode throughout the workday. That's not to say that I don't have things that I enjoy doing that aren't creative outside of writing, but realistically, so one of my favorite things to do in the world is play golf, and for me that is very analytical. It is very, very structured, right? And so it's interesting that Ross mentions, well, I flip it on, flip it off. Mine is on most of the time, and I'm actively looking for ways to flip it off so that I can kind of take a step back and I think recharge more than anything.
I love that. And I feel like if I knew more about neuroscience, we could explore that, but I don't.
I feel exactly the same way, Mark, and I had never considered what that might sound like in words. That was really interesting to hear you say that, because my brain runs the same way. I think in the daytime, it's pushing creativity and it's finding places to be creative unintentionally often. And then at nighttime, I want to shut it off because my brain is noisy. And so to shut it off at the end of the day, I can decompress and say, okay, because that when it's creative, I feel like I'm running at such a high tilt, That's really interesting to hear you put it that way.
Well, and that's so interesting because Mark, one of your original comments was that you are essentially put like parts of yourself into the work. Mm-hmm. Right. So I wonder if there's a little bit of an association there, because if you think of, like, let's say we think of creativity as like a limited resource in our cognitive bandwidth or something, then we would consider its expenditure costing something. Right. And maybe that's just the way you're wired. Right. That there's kind of a sense that there's, limited capacity for different types of cognitive activity in the course of a day. And you kind of spend it and then you're spent.
Yeah. I think that's a very accurate way to put it, because I can, especially if there's a big project that I'm working on, anything like that, I obviously we all get burnt out at times, and we all have, where we just push ourselves to the limit. But I think that the more that as I get older, joking about age before we jumped on here, Joy, as I get older, I realize more and more that being able to take a step back and really find ways that allow me to decompress and turn that off, the more creative I am whenever I do get up in the next morning and I'm ready to go. But it's interesting, you talk about that limited bandwidth. Personally, I'm a morning person. I get the majority of my work done before noon. Afternoon, it is a complete, crapshoot in terms of whether or not I'm going to be productive or not at times, which is possibly because of that. And so, yeah, I think that the idea that it's a finite, resource is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, for some people. But like, for instance, right, like what y'all described, and even how we've had conversations before about like your internal voice, right? And like, Kaitlin says essentially she has a constant internal dialogue, right, of just chatter in her head. And like, I don't at all. Like, my head is completely quiet. Like, until I think a thought, it's just, we're just chilling. Like, so I almost wonder if there's just literally like kind of a little bit of a wiring in that personality types. I mean, even in these 5 people, like Ross and I are definitely more aligned in our personality type. Y'all 3 are more aligned in yours. Just a little bit different, right? Because I don't ever feel that. Like, I don't ever feel like, okay, I I'm spent in terms of creativity. And it's not because I'm an exceptionally creative person. I just don't think that way. I don't know. I just don't experience creativity that way.
I've always chalked the internal voice that you're referring to up to just being an only child.
We had this conversation, I feel like not that long ago, about who, among us has that running monologue. And there was more of us than I had anticipated. So it's kind of interesting to see that. But yeah, it's noisy. But I feel like that noise is also where all of my creativity comes from, because I don't know that I have a skill to override that noise. Does that make sense? Like I'm not a hardwired, like some people are runners, right? Some people can get up and run and their bodies are made for it and their minds are made for it. And that's just a skill that they have. Whereas like, I don't have that when it comes to creativity. Like I don't get up and am creative. Like that monologue is what drives the creativity.
See, and I think
I think that's an interesting.
Go, Ross, because you're
Go
probably
ahead,
going to say something similar to me.
Okay. I think it's an interesting point that, people are creative in different ways, right? Creativity isn't like one like defined set of behaviors or skills, right? Everyone experiences it differently and everyone arrives at it differently, right? Joy has like a quiet, empty head.
What is that like?
To put it politely, whereas, Kaitlin's
don't know that sounds great.
I know. Quiet cam head. I don't know. It doesn't sound nice anyway to put it, but you know what I mean. Whereas, for me, I have I think I've told this before. It's like a coach in my head, like kind of like saying you need to do this and this and this, and here's what would make this good. People kind of experience it differently and or have different motivations for it as well.
The idea of the comparing it to running is really interesting, because I do see it as I'm not a marathon runner, right? When it comes to creativity, I'm a sprinter. I get it done in bursts, and then I need to recharge. Then I can get it done in bursts, and then I need to recharge again. Whereas, where it may be where Joy or Ross or anybody else can go all day, right? And the creativity can be flowing. They can be, you see some ebbs and flows, but for the most part, it's pretty steady. I don't see that. I see very high peaks and valleys in mine, I think.
And see, like you guys have described it as a flow, which I think is a very common way to think of it, right? People getting in flow. And I don't understand that concept experientially at all. How I view it is I collect ideas all the time. I observe the world, I read a ton, and I have spent my life collecting ideas. So when I sit down to do something, I just arrange those ideas. That's all I have to do, right? I just collect. Okay, I go, okay, I have to write an article about HVAC. Okay, I've done these things. I have these experiences. These are the 6 building blocks I'm going to use. And then I just put them in my processor and I arrange them and there's an article. So I feel like because I view it that way, like my task as a creative person to enrich my creative pursuits is the collection of more ideas. So the more I can experience of the world, the more I can read, the more podcasts I can listen to, the better equipped I am to be creative on demand about almost anything, which is a vast overstatement because obviously there are endless numbers of things I cannot be creative about and don't know. But that's the goal, right? Like until I end this life or whatever, I'm just going to keep collecting as many ideas as I can so I can create higher and higher caliber of arrangements.
The creative on demand thing is interesting, right? My mind, as soon as you said it, my mind went to the going up to a comedian and asking them to tell you a joke, right? It for me, that just doesn't I have to be in the mindset. I have to be like, it has to be just right. And it's interesting because at times I have writer's block very badly. I'll approach an article 6 ways and it still just doesn't make sense. And then finally, all of a sudden, something clicks and then that flow picks up and I can actually run with it. The on-demand aspect of it is interesting.
I think this probably, like, if we explored this deeper, directly like correlates with our styles that we do anything in our lives. Because Joy, like, you are just like a superhuman Leslie Knope type that can just like go and work and do, and you've got a task and you're gonna tackle it no matter what, like no matter how you feel, no matter what's going on in your life. And I think for some people, myself included, that no matter what kind of task or work or creative or analytical or whatever, like I just don't have that same like drive at all times that I feel like you have, and maybe like Ross has, because y'all are like built similarly. And so I feel like it probably is not just the creativity. I think it's probably everything that we are tackling differently.
And how much of that
I think
comes
you
down
have
to
to-
sheer determination.
Right. Yeah. All of it, probably.
I think the key is like figuring out what gives you energy and what drains your energy, right? So for us, it might be, like being creative, like gives you energy, whereas, being stuck in like back-to-back meetings all day drains your energy. Like that's how it is for me. Like I find it far easier to be creative when I have like a full hour to sit down, a blank page in front of me, no distractions, and that gives me energy and I can do good work there. But if I'm like back-to-back in like 5 meetings in a row, that like drains my energy, and by the time that's done, like I don't have any juice left to be creative. I just got to go and like zonk out somewhere. So I think if you can like understand that and create make the time to be creative around your schedule and try and build your work life in such a way that you have more time for those kind of energy driving activities than the energy draining activities, then I think that can help a lot with allowing you to be more creative.
It's funny, Angela, as soon as you said that, my wife would be the first to tell you that I have 2 modes. It has to be done right now, or it can wait until tomorrow. Right. And I think that it's the same thing. It translates to exactly what you were saying. And that doesn't matter what it is. If it's a DIY house project, if it's anything, those are basically my 2 modes, because I am without a doubt, I'm trying to become a reformed one, but I'm without a doubt the world's worst procrastinator. And I have been since I was little. That was always my mode of thinking was, I can either get it done today or it's tomorrow. It's future Mark's problem.
I always told myself.
I like Ross's point around that self-monitoring, right? So tuning in a little bit better to the ebbs and flows maybe of your energy, and then evaluating the tasks that you perform accordingly, right? So knowing that, and that's been, I mean, for me as a boss, that's been a big thing, is like understanding that, yeah, I mean, 12 meetings, bring it on. Like those are life-giving. I'm an extrovert, I'm all these things, but like that would like ruin Angela's life. So, it's important that we all acknowledge that, but then the nature of our work being creative means that in order for us to not go out of business, we all have to meet certain quotas of creative production, right? So it's this balance, I think, and I think Ross's solution is perfect, because the idea that you don't have to square peg round hole it. You just have to figure out who you are, how you work, and then what is the optimal condition, and then strive to get as close to that, I guess, on a regular basis as you can.
I think as close is the word right there, because in a perfect world, right, we could all schedule structure our schedules so that it fits exactly how we work. If I was able to do everything that I could in the mornings and then have a meeting here or there in the afternoon, or menial tasks that I have to get done for business in the afternoon, I could. But working with other people that are on different schedules is sometimes much more complicated, and having to, I think that's, whenever we talk about creativity, my mind goes to coders, right? We know that coders get in this zone where they may code for 15 hours at a time because they have everything clicking and everything is working properly and they're seeing everything in front of them. In our position, especially if you're dealing with clients and dealing face to face with those people and having to take things as they come up, it becomes a little bit of you get hurdles thrown in the way that can potentially, okay, well, I'm at a really creative high. Wait a minute, I've got to go to this meeting now and I'm going to drop off. Being able to pick that up is a bit of a challenge for some people as well. So,
yeah, good point. So we talk a little bit about, the nature of a creative identity, and this actually is really relevant where we kind of naturally went with this conversation anyway. But essentially, do you find the way that you identify as a creative professional, and Angela literally answered this question already. So presenting in most areas of your life? Or do you feel like it's relegated to conscious disciplines? So like I have a hobby as a painter, but I'm an accountant and everything I do is extremely structured and organized. Like, do you feel like the kind of your creative bent, capacity, penchant, style is pretty consistent throughout all the different areas of your life? Or do you feel like it's relegated to when you're actually like doing creative work? And there's not a right or wrong answer.
I think it's kind of everywhere, but I also think that for me personally, like and everyone here has like chosen a career where you do that. You're using your creativity during the day, every day. And that kind of practice lends itself to helping you, for me at least, the kind of practice in creative lends itself to more creativity in other areas of your life or of other areas of my life. Like it's a muscle that when you work it out, it appears more places to me. That's my experience, at least, I think.
I think I would agree. I mean, my hobbies are creative hobbies. I sew, I craft, I garden, I bake, like all of these things are all kind of a creative flex. But we spoke about it earlier, kind of running out of gas, having used up the creativity for the day. I find myself after having spent a day at work, then not having the drive to do anything creative at the end of the day. So I find that, yeah, I run out of gas, but my creativity does span all of the things that I enjoy doing. So yeah, it's everywhere, but whether or not I have the gas to do it is another issue.
I'd go the other way. I'd say for me, it's pretty compartmentalized to work. And even within work, like when I meet people and like, I don't know about you guys, but I describe myself as like a consultant or like instead of like a writer, even though I write like thousands of words a week. And outside of work, I don't have like a ton of super creative hobbies, right? Like Mark, I play golf, I run, I cook. Like I don't think any of those things are super creative. There's like creative elements to them, but it's not like, and clocking off work and trying to write the next great American novel or like breaking out my painting supplies, right? So for me, it's pretty compartmentalized, but I like the idea of it as a muscle, right? I just see it as like a muscle that, I work it out for 40 hours a week, and then I leave the gym and I'm kind of done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a shift since moving more to a creative role. So whenever I was in sales for a decade, and that was, I mean, you could argue there's some creativity there trying to sell to people, but at the same time, it's not quite to the same, not to the same intensity or level that this is that we're discussing. But at that point in time in my life, I sought out more creative outlets outside of work, whether it was leatherworking or woodworking or these different things that I could actually take something that was not there, build something, make something out of it, and kind of flex that side of flex those muscles. Now, as I do that through my day to day, I find it more relaxing. Like I said, more relaxing to do something that is not right. In some way, find some way to decompress. It can be something like reading, but it's got to be something that where my mind I can quiet it more than anything. And so I would say that I don't know. I tend to not let it bleed over into my life like I did at one point in time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm with Ross. So I don't have I'm not an artistic person. I'll do creative things here and there, but honestly, on the weekends, on time off, I want to read books and I want to clean. I love cleaning. I'm obsessed with it. It's so fun. I rarely get to do it because I work so much, but I love all the potions and the sponges and the thing, laundry. It smells good. I love it. And again, I'm not a housewife, so I don't get to really ever do stuff like that. So maybe it's the novelty of it. And Caitlin's I hate you. But yeah, so I think for me, I am interested in the intake, because I think that especially reading for me reading is my favorite thing to do. And it fills me with ideas. that I can use, right? Even if it's fiction, it's speech patterns, it's characters, it's a different version of the world, like all of those things. Because at the end of the day, like I am only fulfilled if I feel productive. And I think I've talked about that before. Like I need the boxes to check. I need the product at the end to be like, I exist and I matter. And I'm okay with that, right? Like my therapist said it's fine. So I think that some of it is that, right? Like if you kind of view life as a journey that you enjoy along the way, or if you're quite a destination oriented person, and there is no wrong way to be, I think, of those two. But I like the stops along the way. I like the destinations. And then I like to close things out. Like I don't like open ended. I'm just gonna write a book for 5 years. Like no, I will write a book for the next 9 months. Here's the story. Here's the characters. Here's their arcs. Here's the end. And this is when it will be done. Like that's the only world I can live in. Understanding you have to adapt along the way, but like those roadmaps I find very comforting, and it almost provides like guardrails around the creative process.
That's something that I wish I liked more. And I think maybe working at Higher Writer already has helped a little bit with that, like just working with you, Joy, because in my head, I'm like, do not give me parameters. Do not make me have a deadline. Like I will, like I want to float with the wind or whatever, but not like for work, but for like writing a book, for instance, like I'd be like, oh, just, like whenever I feel like it, but that's like not helpful or productive. And so you and I have had conversations about like a creative practice and like working on that and figuring out like what works best for you. And I'm still on that journey, but I do wish I was wired more like what you're talking about.
It's funny, we a while back, my wife and I, we decided, okay, well, we're going to get up and train for a 5K, right? We're going to do a 5K. Well, that lasted about a week because we didn't have anything on the schedule. And I'm, like I said, it's either happening now or it's not going to happen until way down the line. So for me, I think kind of to Joy's point, I do need that structure, and I have to self-impose it. I've learned that along the way, that if I don't have milestones in front of me, it will not get done in any reasonable time frame, because I am not wired that way, it is very, very difficult for me at times to be able to sit down and say, okay, you have to do this. And which isn't a bad thing. What's frustrating for me is that I happen to pass that same gene along to our son. And so I see it, day to day in him. And it's like, no, you have to don't be like me. Don't do this. You need to have a little bit more structure in your life, and it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think the big question is, are creators creative everywhere? And I think that so I kind of want to deviate a little bit from the idea of creativity in a professional context and more creativity as a practice that you implement in everyday life. Because I think if you are observant and you extrapolate out and consider, especially in right now, like in this climate where basically every work of art could be a deep fake, right? We're in this incredibly unique season of culture, right? Where there's this onslaught of mediocrity in the form of AI generated X, Y, or Z. And, part of our different, like, I would say probably the key difference, maybe other than like consciousness, right? That we are conscious humans, is creativity, right? Our ability to, regardless of how true it is, create something out of nothing, ex nihilo, right? Out of nothing. And to be able to take raw components and put them together in a way that they've never been put together before, which isn't technically ex nihilo, but the idea, the concept, right, of creating something out of nothing. And I think that, there's a real risk in easy things. Like I'm always very suspicious of something that's easy, because I think that more often than not in my life, I have become good at something because it was hard. because it forced me into a discipline. It forced me into a pattern. And in hindsight, the process of getting good at it, the actual value of that was not mastering something. The actual value of it was the character I developed along the way, right? So when I did an Ironman however many years ago, like, it was the character I developed along the way of training for that. I didn't place. I didn't like do incredibly well, right? But I did it. I finished. And so you learn a lot about yourself, you learn a lot about the world. So I think that, we all have these handy dandy tools at our fingertips, as do all creative professionals. And even in life, there seems to be just this incredibly dominant messaging that your life should be easier. Your life should be easier. You should work less, you should enjoy it more, and we want every device, every tool, every resource, every relationship to be easy. And I think that's the opposite of what it takes to be really creative. Maybe you disagree.
I think the role of a lot of those kind of tools and devices that you talked about, there's kind of two ways you can look at it. You can look at it the way that you're looking at it, or you can say, okay, can I like automate all the, boring, time intensive, labor intensive activities that are drivers or are drainers of my energy to free up more time for that creative energy? So for example, can I like order my groceries to be delivered online instead of going to the store for 2 hours? So I have an extra 2 hours to spend on some kind of creative outlet or hobby. I think that's more the way I look at them than I think, they're enablers to creativity to give you more time to be creative rather than, making life too easy to the point where you don't feel the need to be creative anymore.
I think that's true to a certain extent, though, because think of all the people that aren't using that time that they've just bought back from these tools, these easy buttons, right? And they're not using it in the way that it could be productive, or it could be like it literally is just an easy button. And there's nothing or learned from it. There's nothing that comes out of it other than the fact that they didn't have to go to the grocery store. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that everyone uses their time in the same way that we might in pursuit of flexing a creative muscle or building something from nothing or going, that one step further.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're tools, right? And, you can use tools to build things or you can use tools to destroy things. It works both ways. So, and I don't think you always have, you don't always have to be on. We've talked about this before, right? It's fine to veg out on the sofa and
right.
watch TV, right? You don't have to be creative all the time. So yeah, I think it's just being being deliberate about how you use these tools and not just allowing them to kind of take over every element of your working life and make things too easy. Because if things are too easy, you're not learning anything, you're not challenging yourself, you're not growing, right? And that can get boring and demotivational in itself for a lot of people.
I joke with people, I've always enjoyed trying new hobbies. Joy, you mentioned the Ironman and actually having something finished and the struggle through that. I feel that with a lot of the hobbies that I've done over the past and finding those creative outlets, it's more about embracing the fact that I suck at something, right? I'm going to make something. Whenever I first started leatherworking, I was terrible at it. I'm still not great at it. I will give you a gift. It might be the ugliest gift you've ever received, but I'm still going to do it because I enjoy doing it, right? It's not something that I have to monetize. It's not something that I have to. And I think that's where it becomes challenging for the easy button, as you're referring to, is it's easy to not embrace the suck. It's become substantially easier to not do that, and I think that that's a big. It has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages, and I think that as we move forward, we'll start seeing the disadvantages play out more and more, because I think that the ones that are leaning into it are going to slowly, because I do think that creativity is a muscle you have to flex. I think that the more you do flex it and find opportunities to, whether it's through work or outside of work, the more apt you are. and it may be something where you may not be able to turn it back on at the same level, right? We all, you talk about children having amazing imaginations, and we hear all the stories from, from your kids, Joy, and whatnot, and from yours, Kaitlin. And it's one of those things where, even as adults, we stifle that to some extent. And I think that, had we not done that growing up, could we have maybe had a little bit better imagination? Does that make me more creative? Does it not? So I don't know. I see it as, again, kind of Ross, you can use them. I think you have to use them sparingly, just because if you fall into the it's a pitfall if you move forward into just really diving into anything that's super easy. And don't be afraid to fail at something.
Yeah, and I think, what I maybe am addressing even more broadly than use cases is the general mentality, right? So the idea that, well, if ChatGPT can write an article that is just as good as a typical mid-career copywriter, then why not use ChatGPT? Now, I'm not saying don't use ChatGPT, but I am saying, then what becomes of the writer? Like, then where is the challenge, and how are you inviting that challenge? Because we romanticize the concept of life being easy. Oh, if life could just be easier. If I could just be rid of this challenge, if I could just be rid of this suffering, if I could just be through this season. We've all experienced tragedy. We've all experienced sickness. We've all had, terribly difficult things, maybe even for very long periods of time. And that's the nature of life. And in our incredible positions of privilege, let's just acknowledge that, right? Incredible positions of privilege. There is a huge risk of falling into this version of life that we just float. We just want to float. We want to check out. We want to be in this like liminal gray space all the time. Now, on the other, there's a pendulum here, right? So there's like people who kind of go that direction a little bit, right? And they're just like, I want life to be easier. I want life to be safer. I want life to be all these things. And then there's people who like make life harder than it needs to be, right? But like, no offense, Kaitlin, but like the glorified homesteaders, like the people who are like out there, like working with wooden tools and no modern technology. Like, again, if there's people have different value systems and reasons they pursue those things, but there's extremes on both sides. And I think that on both sides, you either work yourself into a place where you have no ability to be creative and to further art and humanities and meaningful works, or you are so, to Ross's point, like demotivated by just being kind of a lazy, listless, I don't want to use a lot of mean words here, that you don't create anything either, right? Because it's too hard. Well, it's just easier to just use ChatGPT. It's just easier to just use Midjourney. And so there's this romanticization. I don't know. That's not a word, but there's a word around that probably. Of doing that I think is a real risk for creative professionals. And I think there's going to be like a line drawn in the sand. And I think there's going to be two camps of us. And there are going to be some people who are like, that's just easier and I can sell it and I can make money doing it. So why not? Which again, they're not the villains. Like, that's not the camp I want to be in.
No, and it's funny. I guess, was it last summer? I think we did the exercise of, okay, we're gonna create something in ChatGPT and then we have to edit it, right? I struggled with that. That is not. It took me 3 times longer to edit an article than it would have for me to write the thing, because my brain is not wired that way, and I could not connect the dots that they were connecting, even though the article may have made sense. It wouldn't have. But yeah, you talk about the bigger picture. I'm really curious, if we look back on it, and I don't know that it'll be maybe not an exact parallel, but look at skilled trades now, right? Whenever I was going through college, you were going through college, Joy, at our age, skilled labor was failure to some extent, right? If you went into a trade now, we talk about it like, man, this you could make 6 figures within just a few years out of high school, because this is such an in-demand thing. Now, I don't know that it goes that direction with within the creative fields because of ChatGPT and all of these different tools. But at some point in time, you're going to have I don't know that you'll have the drop off where you need those, but at the same time, you're going to have a very distinct, again, 2 camps, like you mentioned, where you're going to have and then you're going to have customers that say are going to be in the same thing, or do they want the easy, or do they want, a more fine-tuned, right? And I think, and do they want experience? And I think that from a business standpoint, personally, I would want, much more catered and fine-tuned than I would just an easy. If it's easy, I can do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think the two camps are a Venn diagram, though, right? I don't think you can be, firmly in one camp and not in the other camp. I think you have to be open to new ideas, or you can't just like cling steadfastly to the way you've always done things, right? Society changes, the economy changes, the ways of working change, technology, we wouldn't be having this conversation today if it wasn't for technology, right? And this is just another iteration of technology, and it's maybe affecting our industry in a way that, technologies haven't done so much in the past, but they've affected plenty of other industries, and people have adapted and overcome it. So yeah, I think, you just need to keep an open mind, not be, closing down new ideas, or, sticking your flag too firmly in one camp, because things change and we have to adapt and kind of change with the times.
I only do that with kombucha, and my opinion of it, as we discovered yesterday.
Yeah, problem.
I'm firmly in the no camp on kombucha.
Yep.
This like hurts my soul.
I already explained to you the future of your career here.
We can't be friends anymore because of this.
Wait, I have literally right here. I'm drinking my kombucha. Yeah, no, I think, Ross, that's point well taken. And like, obviously I have not stuck to my guns, because we have an entire AI division of our company. So I think there is, I think I'm of two minds about it. I, as a business person, am willing to leverage any ethical resource to build my business so that you guys can make money, right? That's my job as a boss, right? To make you guys as much money as possible so that you have a great life. I'm willing to do that, right? But I think when I consider my own creative life, and then also the creative development of my children, right? So what is their creative capacity? I mean, we talked about that. What kind of freedom do they have? And as a parent, letting your 6-year-old think outside the box, honestly, is the worst. And you know my daughter, so you know exactly what it has resulted in. She's beautiful and she's wild, right? She questions authority without compunction. There's nothing she's afraid of or intimidated by. She believes that her ideas are as important as anybody else's. And while that makes parenting very difficult and exhausting, I do see the end result being that she feels empowered to be creative, to think differently. And I think that so when I think of kind of this landscape of the kind of current situation we're in and the future and all of that, the building blocks of what will make my children great creative humans, right? We're not trying to raise great children. We're trying to raise great adults. We're trying to raise great humans who are empowered to be competent and creative, is hard, because they're going to have access to so many more shortcuts to the creative process than I ever did. And so I think taking that into consideration is what brings me a little bit of this weighty thought process. I have to evaluate this a little bit differently when I consider the actual creative development of somebody who's starting to learn how to write letters, then stories, then whatever.
Well, I mean, you talk about children and having access. Mason's a freshman this year. They use Canva in several classes to be able to put together presentations and things like that. And we had some tools growing up, but it wasn't to the extent that they do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I necessarily see it as stifling his creativity, right, but it is making it easier, because he doesn't have to go scour the internet for images or do any of these different things for projects. He can actually just pick and choose with the click of a couple of buttons. And I is there value in that? Absolutely. Does it mean that it's got, that he shouldn't be proud of it? Absolutely not. He should still be proud of the work that he's doing and things like that. So yeah, it is a delicate balance, and I don't want to be the old curmudgeon, in 10, 15 years that's no technology. So yeah, you do have to find some balance there.
It kind of reminds me of holding on to cursive writing. Schools are doing away with it, and all of us are but no, cursive's so important. Is it? I don't know. But when I think about, Joy, you brought up your kids, and I think about mine too often in this sense. I wrote notes in college with a pen and paper. You know, I didn't have a laptop for the longest time. And then even when I did, it was harder to adapt to that, even with an easy button like that. And I think too, like, are my kids going to understand what good like I think about my field, right? I think about the copywriting field. Are they going to understand what good copy looks like if ChatGPT and whoever else is pumping out this content? Like, that's a volume game, but is it a quality game? You know? And so for people to differentiate the two and be able to identify like what is good copy and what makes sense for businesses, I struggle with that. Because just because it comes out of ChatGPT doesn't make it great or nuanced or, you know, all of those things that you would learn along the way as you're building this creative muscle.
But you could have said the exact same thing 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I don't even know how old I am sometimes. with Wikipedia.
Oh, absolutely.
But look at Wikipedia now, and in every AP class that my son's in, they can use Wikipedia as a trusted source, which is mind blowing because of how filled with within
they're allowed to now.
Oh, it's encouraged.
I'm super unsettled about this
because it has come so far in terms of the quality, and you could say the same thing is likely to happen with generative AI, is that it's going to continue to evolve and improve. I know that it is mind blowing, even as it's hard for me to say that, but
I'm unwell over this, Mark.
Yeah, but ultimately, I see it as the same type of thing where 10, 15 years from now, it could be completely different. Where that is good copy. It's no different than if somebody that wrote it, from a personal experience.
I guess I get hung up on the fact that it might be good copy, but the people reading it, will they understand what good copy is? Like, the AI generated content itself may in fact be good copy, but will the readers understand, and will people trying to create understand what makes it good? Like the actual function of it. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I'm really hung up on this.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, I mean, we're having a conversation about metacognition, right? We're thinking about thinking, and I think that's the challenge.
That's when the brain's on fire.
We want our children, we want ourselves to be able to max out the capabilities of technology, right? To Ross's point, find the smartest ways, the best shortcuts, all of these things, and still become independently capable creative thinkers. And so that's the challenge, right? That's the Venn diagram, right? If you can be in that middle section where it's like, I appreciate the value of all of this, right? Of what the technology can do, of what it will be able to do, how it accelerates my productivity. And I could unplug and walk away and still be a fully capable creative professional because of the power of my brain and what I know and what I can do and how I can arrange things. And so it's this balancing act, I think, that any serious-minded creative professional is contemplating right now and trying to consider, how do we remain balanced and then move forward, move the work forward in meaningful ways. Did I butcher your interpretation, Ross?
No, that was beautiful. Sorry, Ross, but that was beautiful.
No, I liked it. That was good.
He's a mic dropper. All right. This is interesting. I never get tired of like having conversations where we relay our like personal experiences with something and find ourselves to be so different. And like, arguably, most of us are doing the same job. And yet we are so different.
but we've talked about it ad nauseum at times, that we approach it very, very differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have a set way of doing things. And I think that being open to the idea of picking up pieces and help and incorporating the way that Kaitlin does something versus the way that I do something, it can help me become better at what I do. And it can help me become more creative, whether it's in work or not. But I think I think that's the element that, you talk about AI, that it can't quite get there. It can spit out copy, but can it have those same processes and be able to pull specific things and memories and whatnot And if it can't, then that's where we still have the edge, I think. It's not going to know to use a Top Gun quote in the middle of something that has absolutely no business needing a Top Gun quote, is ultimately what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think, that's a good point, and you're correct. I'm less interested in like, will we still be needed? Can we outperform AI? And more like, how do we ensure we preserve the fulfillment of this work? So all my things about like, I need things to be hard sometimes because that's how I get strong, right? Things don't get easier, you get stronger. All these things, like we pursue creative things because we have an itch or an impulse, like Mark and Kaitlin said. We are fulfilled by it, to Ross's point. We organize our lives around it. We learn ourselves better because of it. Like all of these wonderful results of being a creative professional and dedicating our lives to a form of creative work where we are taking things, rearranging them, making something new. I don't want to ever lose that and kind of lose the value of that because we're distracted, right? Or because we want it, or because it could be easier a different way. And so I think as long as we stay in community, we stay connected to people who have different strengths and weaknesses, we continuously seek feedback, and we are dedicated to our own creative disciplines, then I don't think we run a huge risk of that happening. But I think we have to be thoughtful about it. We have to be intentional about it because the pull is real.
Do you feel that let's see if I can say this the right way. Do you feel that if the process becomes easier, right? Fulfillment becomes more about the journey and less about the milestone, kind of going back to your kind of plot points earlier. That's the way that I interpret it, right? Is if it's easy and I don't necessarily find fulfillment in the act of doing something small, I have to be able to find fulfillment in the journey as it stands, of whether that's working with a specific client and helping them reach their goal, whether it's something personal on my side. I think that's where it seems to it might shift with all of these tools and pieces that are coming in and being introduced to make it a little bit easier. Does that make sense? I don't even know if I said that right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are purpose seekers, right? Like we don't want to do things that are pointless. We don't want to do things that have no point. That's the easiest way to burn out, is to feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over. And what's the point? That's when people quit. That's when people move on. That's when people change careers. So I think it's always about, regardless of where, how you filter these ideas and how you think through this on a personal practice level, professional level, it's a matter of always remembering that about yourself and not diminishing the importance of having that be like a coherent thought. Like, what is the point? Is there a definition to that? What is my purpose? What is the goal? What is the point? And like you said, thinking, yeah, I mean, I can do a lot of menial work if I feel like I'm really helping good clients who are good people make money so they can feed their families and pay their mortgages and do the things, right? Like I can do a lot of work that I would say like the work itself is kind of, right? Like a nothing burger or kind of pointless. But at the end of the day, the point that keeps me motivated and engaged and excited is these people that we're serving and diligently and all that. So yeah, I think it's regardless of what you end up saying that is, it has to be personal. It has to mean something to you. And you kind of got to keep your eye on it. I think.
Yeah, and I think having kind of a rich variety of that, right? So I don't think you should draw all your purpose in life from work. Like it should be being a great spouse, being a great parent, having like a goal you're working towards, whether it's like an Ironman or like, breaking 85 on the golf course, like whatever your goal is or goals are outside of work. I think it's important to, give those equal or greater priority than your goals at work, because I think that, for me, that gives me much more purpose than work.
That was a balanced comment. Thank you.
That was the Venn diagram that you referred to.
That's what he's been doing to me all day.
Oh, yeah.
Have you noticed that? I'm like, here's an extreme statement. Ross is like, well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Any final thoughts about creative identity or anything we talked about today? All right. This was fun. Thanks, guys.